Wolf, an identity beyond trauma. When I first considered the question as to when I became aware that I was a witch, I had thought maybe when I was 17. That's how old I was when my biological mother called and told me that I had been molested when I was just 2 years old. I knew she was telling the truth because I grew up denying this every single time I heard the word rape. I told myself it had to do with a future trauma, but my response to being forced out of denial was a rapid downward spiral with loads of useless self-pity. I was unable to consciously take steps toward my own healing. This was a time when I most needed to connect to that aspect of me, but didn't know how. While I desperately wanted to heal, I didn't know where to start. I felt trapped. While there was one small grain of hope and an empowering idea, I found myself drowning in misery and despair. You see, at this time in my life, I already believed in reincarnation, so I thought to myself, what if I, as a soul, chose this life, knowing how hard it was going to be at the start? While this was a somewhat helpful thought, it did not prevent me from wishing to die. I felt it would be easier to heal from the sexual trauma if my body and human consciousness weren't in the way. Although I couldn't bear the thought of hurting my family by taking any actions, I would spend an awful lot of time daydreaming of terrible accidents that could befall me and cause my death. So back to the question, when did I know I was a witch? I'd say it started dawning on me during the pandemic. Thanks to the excess free time I had during isolation, I started diving into my writing practice by challenging myself to do some meditative writing each day. Some of these experiences were blissful, and I could believe the positive words Spirit was guiding me to write. Others were bitter, but I would challenge myself to flip the script during those sessions. I would acknowledge and write out all the grief, all the ugly thoughts my ego carried, and then I would search for an answer to the grief and the self-judgments. Most of the time, I'd be able to come up with something to turn the tone around. But on one occasion, the answer came to my grief a few days later. After writing for most of COVID, I was able to put together a binder of 141 pages of poetry and called it Writing Myself Out of Depression. Ironically, I still ended up on Lexapro, and I'm okay with that. Leaning on modern medicine isn't a sign of weakness, and it was clearly a necessary step for me. One way to let go and go with the flow. When you open your hand, you let go. And in the same way, when you open your heart, you let go. When you open your energies, you let go. Opening equals letting go. So keep yourself open. Use the mantra, I open to the love and light of God and release my fears. Know that we can't stray far from God's path, for we are one with God, and because all that unfolds is according to God's plan. We've all heard this, but we must learn to go with the flow. The flow of the wind and the flow of a stream know nothing of time. They know nothing of distance or obstacles. So when you align with the infinite flow that is source, neither will you. The river never asks itself, why haven't I reached the ocean yet? Don't judge the journey. Trust the outcome. For this one, use the mantra, God can do anything, and I am one with God. As with any toddler, I didn't know who I was. I hadn't formed a sense of identity yet. And as with any toddler trapped in an abusive household, I took on the identity of trauma. I was trauma. And Charlie is helping me unlearn this. Charlie is not just some mask I'm using to cover over the trauma. It is an identity I have chosen to inspire me forward. Rising like the phoenix, I'm restoring my inner child's sense of identity by becoming Charlie. And Charlie is a fully integrated, fully realized witch.
Ashe.